Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Faizan Akwe with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy and blessed. Fill this world with peace and justice, inshallah. And heartiest congratulations on the event of Eid al-Zaha, inshallah. You all will be having a great Eid, inshallah. Today the topic we will be discussing in today's show is related to Palestine, how the Eid is going on in Palestine and how their resilience is taking place in the event of Eid, especially where the missiles are hitting. 37,000 plus people have been martyred so far in different places. No place is safe for them. So under such condition of fear and death, and they are living in famine as well. There is no aid going inside, even though they have announced the military of Israel has announced a kind of pause for a few hours in which aid can go inside, but in their own papers, if national papers whatsoever, they said there is no pause. So this is kind of a double policy they have always been playing. So how the Eid is going on in Palestine, the kind of suffering, pain, and despite all these, their resilience, their hope, their fighting, all that is something we all can learn from. They are sacrificing on Eid al-Zaha all the Ismails they have, Ismail of their homes, loved ones, lives, and peace. Even the sleep, they can't even sleep in peace. So everything they love to have, so they are sacrificing for what? Liberation of the whole humanity, liberation of all the Muslim ummah. So this is something we really need to learn from them, and we really need to work together in order to stand like they are standing in front of the tyrant rulers of this world. So we will move on to our prestigious guest on this topic, and we will see how they feel about it and what they think about it. We do have a sister Arzu Mirali, who is editor and the founder of IHRC, sister Batul Subeti, who is commentator and activist for human rights, and we do have Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, who is journalist, broadcaster, and he is activist, you can say, as well, researcher as well. So sister Batul, starting from you, because obviously you are a young activist and you are young a person who is looking at everything very deeply and with so much connectivity. How do you see the resilience of the people of Gaza, and what we should learn from them, from their resilience for everything which is happening around us? So what are your thoughts on, especially on Eid Day?
Absolutely. I mean, this war in many respects has been a turning point in not only showing the world the ferocity of the Israeli occupation entity, but also, like you mentioned, the extent of the Palestinian resilience. In addition to the resistance axis, that has come to Palestine's aid, that America has spent, billions of dollars smearing for several years and even decades. If the Israeli occupation entity has failed in all of its plans thus far, it is solely due to Gaza's steadfastness. Today you see the Israeli right-wing cabinet speak of having no solution except depopulating all of Gaza. Essentially, they want to finish from Gaza altogether because they cannot accept the two-state solution. They cannot certainly accept a one-state solution, and they're unable to recapture and reoccupy Gaza because the resistance is still standing strong. So their only solution is to kill Palestinians as much as possible and to create the most unbearable conditions in hopes that the Gazans themselves would want to leave. But ultimately, the only thing that's standing in the way of that is Gaza's fortitude and is Gaza's steadfastness. Have we heard of the Palestinians blame the resistance for the operation that occurred in October? We hear them say instead, may we be sacrificed for the resistance? So if the past 8 months have proven absolutely anything to us, it is that Palestinians have chosen the path of resistance despite the blood that they have to pay, and the Palestinians know very well that a prerequisite to a free Palestine is shedding blood when your occupier is this savage criminal. So the mammoth price that Gaza is paying today is the lesser price also in the whole equation, because ultimately the price of resistance is less than the price of surrendering and giving up, because at the end of this confrontation, the Israeli occupation entity will emerge much weaker, and if you consider that the entity was created to protect Western interests, but now is in a state where it's in need of protection, and it's ultimately proven itself as a failure, and we know that politics runs on power and ability, and the weak has no place in ultimately the world of politics. So the Israeli occupation entity will naturally shrink to match its true size, but that has only happened, and that is only occurring, the disintegration of the Israeli occupation entity is only occurring because the Palestinians have decided to rise up in a manner that tectonically shifts the power balance on the ground and weakens the occupation entity. The Palestinians have learned, like the rest of the masses who overcame Western colonialism, that you cannot be liberated by expecting the UN to invoke resolutions hidden on the shelves, like Palestinians have the right to return, or the illegality of the occupation of the West Bank. That the oppressed on the ground need to force that change, and it happens through direct confrontation. So what's happened in Palestine hasn't just awoken us up, but the whole world has been awakened. It's not just the Muslim Ummah. The blood of Gaza is now the fuel that is awakening the masses. But also, I would argue, like the Arabs that have been asleep for the longest time. And this also gives the opportunity for those countries that are excluded from involvement in resistance, like Egypt, for example, like Jordan, that belong to normalizing governments. It gives them the opportunity to also have enthusiasm and participation. So we have in what the Gazan resistance has achieved a kind of debt, because it's changed the equation for the whole resistance axis. And we know that today, the crimes are too large to cover. The magnitude of shift in public opinion is something that cannot be overlooked. The people in the West are saying, that we did not know prior to this war the extent to which the killing machine in Gaza is linked to our centers and our institutions and our ministries that support it. The people are coming out and are saying, where are the principles and the values that we sing about day and night? Where is the human right to life and freedom from destruction? That this entity is committing all these massacres before the eyes of the world in broad daylight, and there's no one stopping it. In fact, it's the American and the German and the British and European countries that are supplying the killing machine. And just one last thing in terms of Gaza's influence, it is from the ethical perspective as well. The people of the world are seeing the jihad on the ground, the struggle against the enemies of humanity. They're seeing that taqwa, that fear of God alone. They're seeing that aspect of tawakkul, which is reliance on God. They're seeing the aspect of sabr, that steadfastness. They're seeing that qalb salim, that content heart in the face of those trials. They're seeing the sincerity. And the world is ultimately marveling at how Gaza's blood has mobilized the world in a way that's never seen before, how its blood has led now millions to question its secret and its source. And that's all based on God's equations. And that is, what is for God will grow. And the blood of the martyr falls in the hands of God, and ultimately it'll grow. So the magnitude of blood that's sacrificed by Gaza is not an ordinary blood. It is accelerating the New World Order and the demise, I would argue, of the American hegemonic empire by the day.
Thank you, Sister. Sister Arzu, how about, what are your thoughts on the recent, there was a dissolution of war cabinet by Netanyahu, and the kind of pressure he is facing, for example, from America and from within the political environment in their own country. Even before 7th October, he was facing so much problems, and now obviously they are accelerating because they are captives with the Hamas they have, and he couldn't recover them so far. So how do you see this kind of war cabinet dissolution? Do you think it has something to do with anything with Gaza, and it is a positive or negative, or it has nothing to do with it? Or how do you see the whole situation and the kind of Eid celebration in Gaza? What are your collective thoughts on this? Sister Arzu, I can't hear you. If you can lower your voice or something.
My mic on mute. Bismillah. First of all, Batul, mashallah, everything to what you said. Fantastic. In terms of, I just wanted to make a comment before I talk about Netanyahu and the war cabinet, and that is about the And, it struck me a couple of things. First of all, nothing stopped Eid. There was no kind of sanctity. There was none of that, especially if you're my age, Mohsin, I think you'll remember this as well, how we were always celebrating in the First World War. There was, peace on Christmas Day, and people were playing football games together, and, there's a sort of, rules of war and engagement narrative about how the West conducts wars, and we count Israel or Israeli entity as part of that West. The atrocities continued. We had bombings, we had killings, we had all sorts of atrocious things going on. But the thing that was kind of worse for me is that I felt the response, if not worldwide, at least in the westernized settings, it was a bit mute. It was a bit muted, right? We kind of expected it. And I think there's a sort of a slight fatigue where we need to actually be shouting even louder and saying, you know what, it's even worse today. It's even worse today, and it's going to be worse tomorrow because you let it be even worse today, which was there is no limit to the depths that this is going to. Now, going to Netanyahu, is it positive, is it negative, the dissolution of the war cabinet? We have to scroll back. We know that Netanyahu was in trouble before October 7th. We know he was facing imprisonment and by being found guilty of corruption, etc. So there was always a utility for him to go to war, okay, on a personal level. But that said, all the people who joined his war cabinet and
sorry to cut you here, Sister, if you can increase your volume somehow, if there is any possibility to do that,
anything
would
better
be very
now?
helpful.
Is it better now?
Little bit.
Okay. So we know that he was in trouble. We know that he needed distractions and somehow to get himself out of a situation where he could effectively be sent to prison, right? So this is no secret. The events of 7th October played into his hands in that respect. He wanted a distraction. He made sure he got one very blood-soaked, horrendous, genocidal distraction. But, he wasn't alone. That war cabinet that went along with him had that in mind as well. There was always a point in the establishment, or the Israeli establishment, that was looking for an opportunity for something like a final solution of the Palestinians. So now if, some of them are resigning and some of them are not resigning and some of them are with Netanyahu or against Netanyahu, I'm not entirely convinced that that means anything better for the Palestinians. And I think we have to sort of look at even the protests that were running before October 7th against the Israeli regime internally amongst Israelis, and even what's going on now. I think we need to go away and look at some of the work written even by kind of mainstream Zionist newspapers like Haaretz, interviewing people in those demonstrations. The mood is about getting back the hostages. The mood is about justice for Israelis in terms of their own grievances. There's very little, even before October 7th, and definitely very little now, sympathy about Palestine. It's about resolving their own issues vis-a-vis what they believe is happening or has happened to them, etc., etc. I was listening to something quite fascinating earlier, whereby an Israeli writer was saying that very few people in Israel, there's a kind of almost psychosis that has taken hold of the population, because very few people know what is going on, to the extent that very few people know that South Africa has taken Israel to court, to the World Court, to the ICJ, and charged them with genocide, because there is basically a blackout in the Hebrew media, and you'll only find that information if you're going to bother to read the English media. Now, even those people who can read, according to this observer, are not really bothering to read. So it's a kind of, they don't want to hear it, they don't want to see it. So I think we have to be cautious in looking at that kind of internal wrangling and saying, does it benefit, does it not benefit? I think what it does show is that internally, that kind of, the state is on shaky grounds, and it may collapse internally by its own contradictions and its own pathologies, really and truly, okay? Where we are at now is that we need to be thinking, what is the future? What is going to be built in its place? And this is where we have to really decolonize our thinking when it comes to the new world that's rising, because sadly, I speak about myself first, we have a lot of neocolonial baggage in the way we think about politics, in the way we think about justice issues, that we need to interrogate if we're not going to get a new world that just is basically the old world with different looking people at the top of it, of the kind of structure of injustice. And so, you might be saying, well, this is not the time to talk about it, but actually we do have to be thinking about this, because it's not just about Palestine. It is a whole new world that has been rising, and it is the blood of the Palestinians, as Batul rightly said, that is fueling the acceleration of this rise. It's really quite imminent now. We can see the collapse not just of the Israeli entity. I mean, America has gone to pieces. What's the phrase? Gone to hell in a handbasket, right? We need to have solutions or some idea of what we're going to do tomorrow in terms of how we reconstitute the world. And I think that is as much of an issue for us as trying to stop the genocide, because it will stop. We will work to make it stop quicker than, as soon as it is possible, but it will stop, because this is the last vestiges of the real evil empires that are kind of collapsing at the moment. History has shown us that at the point of collapse, this is when empires are at their most vicious. So what is it we're going to do? How is it we're going to reconstitute ourselves? How are we going to look at the world? I was just thinking while you were introducing the show, I was thinking of Sheikh Khadr Adnan, who passed away on hunger strike, I think about 2 years ago. He was Palestinian Islamic Jihad spokesperson. And there's a little clip of him. I'm going to insert it in one of the things I'm writing today, editing today, sorry, where he said, we have only two choices. If we are not going to be Husseini and gain martyrdom in Palestine, then we have to be Zainabi and speak up against the injustice. Now, he's put a huge Islamic framework into the narrative here. And I think, we have to take a lesson from this. We have to be able to go, well, you know what? As Muslims, we have a way of looking at this issue. This is a region that is full of Muslims, and a resistance that overtly bases its resistance on Islamic thinking, teaching, worldviews. We don't need to be being kind of a little bit shy or embarrassed when we're talking in particularly westernized settings about this, okay? It's not the left that is laying down its life for Palestine. Okay? It is not any type of liberal or any type of, what we saw in the Spanish Civil War and that kind of heroism that we saw then, which was heroic, but we have our own heroes and our own way of thinking now. So I think for me, this kind of idea of Eid and Islam and what's happening on the ground, it's very important for me that we really push forward on this now.
Thank you, Sister Arzu. Musalmai, how do you, obviously at the moment you are working on election campaigns and very much in touch with political ideologies of different parties, even national or internationally, because this is the time when Joe Biden is also thinking about there is so much bloodshed happened, for example, in Rafah, and they are trying to send the aid in Palestine. So how do you see these political parties and these people who are trying to first wage a war on innocent people, send them the weapons and all the machinery they needed for killing them, and then they use the same thing, their victimization or whatsoever you can say, in their favor to gain vote and to get into the power. So how do you see this political awareness among the people? As Sister also mentioned something about decolonization of our thinking first. Do you think it is happening, especially I'm talking about the for example like Muslim point of view, and especially from Pakistan, India, and these places, the people who come from these places especially, so or these backgrounds. So do you think they do have that kind of basira or wisdom to see things clearly? Because I have seen many people who are very well educated and working on different very good places and all that, but they don't have that kind of basira or wisdom to see things clearly, and they can't sometimes differentiate between right and wrong, and they mix them up both, and it's really hard to counter such people, for example. So how do you see these things? and what is the best way to, as sister also mentioned, one most important thing, like, I mean, every human being has a conscience and heart, and even if we do something or not, we do still feel the pain of that, whatever is happening around us. So what to do in practical sense, this is something, or that's where everyone feels helpless, or mostly people feels helpless, and some of them obviously come to play their role in activism or whatever. So how do you see, what is your thought on that, and what are your views on current
Yes,
situation?
you're right, Fazia. The last 2 weeks has been very much hands-on, and for the first time after a very, very long time, I've actually really engaged at grassroots again, just to see where our communities are, certainly, and also the non-Muslim. Obviously, my window is a small one. It's in the town of Watford, where Khalid Mahmood is kind of a Muslim socialist orientated fellow who's jumped in with George Galloway and this Workers' Party, and essentially is trying to drive a protest vote based on Gaza, based on the emotions around Gaza. There's about a 9 or 10,000 Muslim constituency around here, so he figures that if he can get that vote and then add to it with 8 or 9, 10,000, he could come quite close to beating the Tories and the Labour fraternity here. That's a logic which I've never really accepted before myself. To be honest with you, I've never voted in my life in this country since I've been here. I've never voted. And I've not voted because I understand systemically underneath all of that system, there are forces and mechanisms which ensure that no matter which political party comes into power, the system will still adhere to what it wants, its own global interests, its financial interests. But when I say it's part of a collective of money power combined with the political mechanisms and all the people who feed off it, as well as the media, the education, even the cultural sector. Nothing is left unturned. All of the whole system is locked into a mechanism which essentially sings from the same hymn sheet. So, you'll find the Euros, for instance, now having all of these, for instance, having this kaleidoscope of colours, which is very, very reminiscent of the Agenda 2030, which is being rolled out by the World Economic Forum and others on a grand scale, the United Nations. It's also reminiscent of the Ukraine flag, for instance, and then you see that it's also reminiscent of the LGBT colours. So just with one set of colours, the kaleidoscope of colours, you can see how they have their narratives running throughout the system. That just demonstrates to me that there is a coordinated synchronization of what happens. I can bring it to the local level and say, well, to what extent do people know about all of that? Well, really, it's almost negligible. In a meeting where we were supposed to go and look at the lack of connection or accountability that local politicians had, it was clear that only one person within that whole hall, out of say 60 or 70 who turned up as community interest, community politically and socially interested people, only one knew about the Agenda 2030. Only one of them even had any idea of how planning and development committees work and what they were doing in terms of neoliberal corporate outfits and their connections with local councils. So there's a mass ignorance about the political realities in which people live. So whilst I'll roll it off and say, okay, the system is entirely rigged and it's kind of locked into an ideology of neoconservative, neoliberal, whatever, cultural, social, political agendas, that is not the narrative which is known on the ground, right? Far from it. Most people are just victims of those agendas, and they only know about whatever happens as symptomatic, events. Palestine is another, arguably for me, another symptomatic event. It's symptomatic of whatever occurred pre and post First, Second World War. There was an agenda. There was an engineering of the world, which was to collapse the colonial system and enter into a system where American imperialism was imposed using democracy as the front and all the other nonsense that they spout about equality and freedom and this kind of rubbish. All of it has been laid to bear so many times by all of us who are activists in the field that it's laughable. We kind of have to cry or laugh when we see it repeated over and over again. So it's dire. The situation is very, very tough in terms of waking up people. Ordinary Muslims, I mean, Eid prayers, maybe there were about 5,000 or 6,000 people who turned up in the park that I went to, where we were canvassing with leaflets, and the leaflet was focused on Gaza and the vote, the protest vote, and Galloway and Khalid Mahmoud, and we were pushing this. Nobody rejected it because they were Muslims, and they took it very quietly. But again, you could see that there was a complete lack of, they weren't inspired. There's no hope. There's no vision. There's no direction. Their purpose was to come as economic migrants to this country, the first generation. They produce a set of youngsters who are probably equally as interested in hypermaterial economic interest primarily. That's their first and foremost concern. There are no political courses. There's no effort within the community to educate young people politically. So the ones that are active, well, again, I think they're a minority, and many of them are actually too scared, too shy, and perhaps not even just too disinterested in politics, because they've not been nurtured in that way. I had my 9-year-old there, and he was talking more about Gaza and the details about what was going on than some of the kids who were 19, 20-year-olds that we were trying to chat to. So I'd say that it's the way we're nurturing them. The way we nurture children has to be looked at, and the way we engage with the community, there has to be some kind of plan to say that 20 years from now, we shouldn't be in the same situation where we have a docile set of people on the ground here in the West who feel for Gaza. Yeah, of course. Which idiot would say that they don't have some feeling about seeing children killed in real time on videos and whatnot? Of course they have emotions and feelings, but I still don't feel that it's kind of created that cataclysmic, revolutionary spirit, which if we were really human and really Muslims, it should have done that by now, because anybody seeing all this would have to ask questions, want answers, and want to actually do something about it, and be offering themselves at least voluntarily to do something, if not a lot. So I'm not going to paint a kind of rosy picture on the ground. I think there's a problem there, and I think tackling that is a huge ask. It's a massive task for those who want to engage in it. It'll keep you busy for life. That's for sure. As far as what they're doing, and as far as the Palestinian, what I said was that's another symptom. Well, I was reading the news today with Saudi. I'd picked it up about a week ago, and I'd kind of guessed and thought these things were going to happen, because I saw people like Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, schmoozing the Chinese and jumping around, taking all these massive investor interests, capitalist investor interests to the east. I heard today that Saudi Arabia have just decided not to renew their oil contracts, etc., with America. I mean, that's huge. It's passing as an undercurrent, but the Saudis are viewing BRICS, and they're viewing the Eurasian axis and China and Russia. And then if I add to that the equation that these guys like Larry Fink, etc., the BlackRock boys, these are all, as far as I'm concerned, money power, part of that high-level money power. They're all okay with this. So it seems to me that somebody up there is quite happy or quite content with America losing its erstwhile absolutely dominant influence in West Asia, and that could by default also mean that means they're not even that bothered about Israel collapsing, because it's untenable. I mean, as a businessman, you would look at that area and think, well, if I've got my money invested in the Belt Road Initiative, and the Chinese are going to come in and we're going to do all this business through the old Silk Road routes, then you don't want an anomaly like Israel there to upset the apple cart and constantly be causing conflict. So from the likes of Larry Fink and the thinking of these sort of money power players, you'd have thought they would wanted some sort of stability and peace. But then how do you do that? And that comes on to what Arzu very, very astutely was beginning to raise, that they're already thinking what the world will be 50, 60 years from now. They've already planned this. They probably planned it past when Richard Nixon was knocking around in China, back in the day, or perhaps it was a little later, but certainly the plans, the general consensus is these money power chaps, they plan at least 40, 50 years in advance. Then they methodically roll out the plan and, with ups and downs, etc. So I think we're just coming to the end game of the transfer of power from west to east. And it's done with the blessings of the high-level money power, the same money power that's been driving American imperialism. So what Arzu says is absolutely right. What we've got to look at is that we can get distracted by the symptoms which are created by them. The problem of Palestine, the plight of Palestine is created by the same money power, the Zionists and whatever. They're all part of one intellect outfit. So if they're going to solve that problem, they're already going to have some kind of solution in their minds, and they're going to be driving towards that. Whether that solution is that the Chinese and the Russians should come in and make sure then that they dominate that area economically, pretending to be friends and not doing it quite in the same way that the Americans have now ended up doing it, whether they're doing that through their deals with Iraq, you hear of huge figures, $200 billion deals for infrastructure in Iraq, $200 billion deals with Iran, $400 billion deals, and in Pakistan and all over. So you're seeing this kind of huge levels of revenue going in to entice these nations to now ally themselves with the Eurasian axis. And at the same time, there's a war with the old order, the imperialist order that they were using. So, I think that Imam Khomeini's words come to mind again. No East, no West. Islam is the best. Again, going back to what Arzu said, we've got to start thinking about when, and it's only a matter of time, when Israel is destroyed and defeated in the shape that we see it today, what will Palestine be? What will West Asia be? Who will be the dominant powers? What is the stakeholdership of the Islamic spiritual movement, which is represented in the Islamic Revolution? How is Iran going to gear up towards that new world? Because Iran itself is also remaining friendly with China and Russia and the Eurasian Axis concept. And that's probably not because the Iranians are stupid, but they know that they can't take the whole world on in one go. So the chances are that they're also playing their hand very steadily, thinking, let's get rid of one headache before we deal with the incoming. So these are complicated issues, and I've rattled on it. I could go on for about another hour and a half with my theories and my thoughts and my kind of question marks. But for this, you need you need deeper analysis. Academics like Arzu, think tankers, people who've got stats analysis, and who can go do the deep dig to find out what these money organizations are doing. Because usually people will look to the politics or the military action. I would always go and look at the money. Follow the money trails, and that'll give you a far better indication of what they intend with Palestine and what the future holds. But for the ordinary man, of course, he's totally divorced from this. For me, it's hard to get a handle on it fully. But for the guy who's just earning his 30, 40, 70, 80 grand a year, all he wants is his car, he wants his house, wants to pay that mortgage. They got he, him, her, whatever, so locked in, Faizi, that all they can think about is how to get into debt. So, they're debt slaves, running with borrowing they've had on the car, borrowing they've got on the house, borrowing on this, borrowing on that. So they're actually, most of the society is in huge debt. They're running day to day. They are focused on symptoms and reactionary behavior. They don't have a plan. They don't know how to deal with their own political systems that they can see, which is Westminster and, Parliament, these electioneering politicians, the lies they all come out with and the nonsense that they spread and the way that they manage things, let alone look at what's behind them, look at what the system behind them. That's not even visible. So I can't give you an immediate sort of magic wand load of hope, but there's an awful lot of work for us, those of us who want to create awareness, to do.
Thank you so much, Muslim. Sister Batul, what are your thoughts on what do you think, coming back to our topic of Palestine and Israel situation, why do you think, why didn't Israeli regime try to get all the captive released earlier in the mutual agreement with the Palestinian resistance or accept the ceasefire proposal pitched by Biden that would see their release. Why is Israel refusing a ceasefire, do you think? What do you think? Why is that happening? They are not accepting it.
Right, it's a good question that I think goes into the whole core of the issue. I think the whole matter right now is that the Israeli occupation entity is betting on a losing game. It is the loser. It is betting on succeeding by chance, and all it has done so far is mass kill. They invaded Gaza in hopes they might reach some kind of military victory on some level, but they reached absolutely nothing. But even the operation to recapture the hostages that you've mentioned, that is ultimately a facade image of victory. Because if in order to release 4 hostages, you have to kill over 275 Palestinians and 3 other captives, that's classed as one of the most disastrous and failed recapture operations. The current Israeli occupation entities government's plan, as we discussed, is the displacement of the people in Gaza, and it's betting on creating the most unbearable conditions. The American Israeli occupation entity, it's important that we state over here that they have the same objective. The only difference is in the strategy. They both want to defeat the Gazan resistance. This is so important. They see it as an extension of the line of the Islamic Republic of Iran that is an existential threat. But the occupation entity has not managed to achieve anything on the ground. So from America's perspective, America wants to stop this failed war. Instead, it wants to go towards conducting limited operations that rely on high intelligence. So, for example, the rescue operation of the hostages, we know that Delta forces, the American forces, were involved. We know that they were on the ground. We know effectively that America has been managing this battle on their behalf in terms of the intel and the rest of it. There were even 5,000 troops on the ground in October, 5,000 American troops. But ultimately, America wants the Israeli occupation entity to achieve those strategic victories, if you like, without this level of mass killing that is ultimately awakening mass consciousness globally. Also, we know that America wants the PA to be the caretaker government of Gaza to replace the Gazan resistance in governance, so that all the interests of the people of Gaza, from food to fuel to jobs to infrastructure, is no longer at the hands of the Gazan resistance. So that's their strategy. That's their way of weakening the Gazan resistance. If the military solution failed, then we have to look towards the political solution. But as far as Israel is concerned, they are just looking for an image of victory. Netanyahu would do anything to prolong the war. That is why he sought to show the rescue operation as one of victory, and he kind of leveraged on that to say that, we need to continue this war, when ultimately it was the biggest failure. And ultimately, this shows how deep the crisis of Netanyahu is, to the point where they want any fake victory to hold on to as a survival mechanism for his position in government. But ultimately, the leadership of the entity is not after victory of any sort. The best characterization I can think of is that they are in a state of loss. They're just avoiding the future, avoiding being accountable to the failures since the start of this war. What they want to achieve, which is dismantling the Gazan resistance, is not practical at all. Just reoccupying Gaza that they speak of, which of course, as we know, is a distant reality on the ground. Top analysts are saying that it would take years of fighting, before that would even be a reality, if it is. So the entity is in a state of just delaying and dragging. It doesn't mind damaging all of Gaza and standing on its ruins to say that this is our version of victory. But the general situation won't allow this to continue for too long, because America wants some kind of stability, quote unquote. It wants to achieve this through the ceasefire proposal. Biden, as we know, he urged the occupation entity in his speech on May the 31st. He pitched the idea of the ceasefire proposal that apparently the Israeli occupation entity devised, but on the same vein, he urged them to stand with the agreement regardless of the pressure. So he stated that there are ultimately those within the occupation entity, as we know, within the government coalition, who will call for this war to remain indefinitely, and the hostages are not a priority for them. He's talking about the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich. But this statement, in addition to the ceasefire proposal stipulating the return of Palestinians back to the north, it implies that the Israeli occupation entities plan to depopulate Gaza, is rejected by America because it does not see that as stable and even implementable as a reality. And the American two-state solution is what will advance as a plan. Doesn't mean that that would be successful. But we're ultimately in a situation where the whole of the entity is captive to Netanyahu and his personal interests. Biden in his speech also claimed that the Gazan resistance are no longer capable of carrying out another October the 7th, as it's been weakened, which obviously we know is a complete illusion. This is whilst the occupation soldiers are being ambushed daily, and even US intel admits that most of the Gazan resistance fighting capabilities and tunnels are still intact. So this tells us the fact that Biden is speaking in this vein, saying that the Gazan resistance is incapable of launching another October the 7th. This shows you that this is a desperate attempt from Biden to grant the occupation entity the excuse in a way to end the war, because he spoke of the failures of reaching any victory against the Gazan resistance through the continuation of war. He emphasized how continuing it is increasing Israel's isolation in the world, and demonstrating the power of international uprising and mass protests, and ultimately weakening the American and the Western position.
Thank you, sister. Sister Arzu, what are your thoughts on collective discussion we have, because we are running out of time and time is running very, very fast. So what do you think, Netanyahu couldn't achieve any military objectives which he was supposed to attain, finishing all the Hamas people and all that, and he couldn't even recover his captives and all that. So how do you think, as Sister Batul already mentioned, it has shaken this Zionist system in many ways. So what do you think this system has this failure has done to this regime? And secondly, second part of this question is related to earlier part of our discussion, which we all were having, Mohsen Bhai and you, like what are the solutions? Because it's fine, awakening is there, knowledge is there, people are there, but do you think we are, even community centers are there? Me and Mohsen Bhai have done a lot of discussion on these topics many times, but I want your viewpoint on that as well. We do have our community centers as well, but do you think we are educating enough our youths for the future? We are able to prepare them for the future they are going to have and the kind of issues they are going to deal with and all that. So what are your thoughts on that collectively?
So I'll try and be quick. With regard to Netanyahu, and as I mentioned, I think there were clearly people who had a plan in place to basically purge Palestine and Gaza specifically of Palestinians, and they were looking for an opportunity, and they have been implementing that. Yes, they have failed miserably in every other strategy when it comes to reoccupying Gaza. Gaza is tiny. It's a huge embarrassment for them. They're I don't know what number, 5 or 2 or 7 or whatever, biggest army and defense forces in the world, and so technologically advanced, and they can't move an inch. They can't really capture any part of it. My worry would be, and I think not to disagree, in a significant way from what Batul was saying, but there is also that idea that in that kind of desperation, there's a sense that they're hanging on and hoping with the Trump administration coming in and the instability in America, they're going to get some kind of either more green lighting for more genocide, as much genocide as they can do, or, America's busy imploding itself, so they're going to have a little bit of, less pressure on them. But it is all kind of, just as Batul was saying, and I think Mohsen averred to it as well, failures after failures after failures. There is no kind of end game. The end game that they thought they were going to have is just pie in the sky. And I'd like to think that they've had a brutal awakening, but I feel like a lot of those figures, including even some of those that resigned from the war cabinet, may still be trying to delude themselves as to what power they hold and what future they could have. That takes us to solutions, really. We have sort of United Nations endless list of resolutions. They're coming to nothing. We do need some kind of international organization to put their foot down. Groups of countries, it doesn't matter if it's BRICS, doesn't matter if it's regional, it doesn't matter if it's new ones, saying, okay, we're stepping in, we are giving you diplomatic cover, we are pushing for what kind of resolutions do you want. A lot of work has been done on this, right? Why two-state solution is a failure, why one state is the only option. Ayatollah Khamenei himself has said that there should be a referendum of everybody who lives within those borders, as false as they are, as well as the entire Palestinian diaspora, as to what they want. At the end of the day, we can sit down and research till the cows come home. It's up to those people who are living there and who have a legitimate right to live there, who are in, getting on for 10 million people around the world now, who are in diaspora, of the Palestinians, to say this is what we want. So these are kind of lists of demands that have to start being made, right? And also, we can discuss options till the cows come home, but ultimately it does have to have traction with the people on the ground who are laying down their lives and giving their blood, and those who survived them, who are living a different type of shahada, which is witnessing that blood being given by their loved ones. Just to pick up on what Mohsen said and what you were saying in terms of educating ourselves and educating our youth, I think I'm not going to be as harsh as Mohsen. I think I've been doing a lot of kind of self-reflection, and one of the things that I realise I did, the generation that's come after me, the generation that's coming up now, we don't learn from the previous generation, right? And I need to sit back and look back and think, what did my parents and my grandparents' generation, and although my grandparents were not born here, but they were born British, right? One whole lot in India. My dad was born in Tanzania, right? Everybody was a British or a German or something subject when they were born. And that generation that came here, yes, they came as economic migrants from Muslim, but you know what? I think all of them were sort of already, a lot of them knew this is still the colonial system and there ain't much you can do about it, right? The same reason you don't vote is why a lot of them just didn't bother, okay? Because they know the story. They've known it for hundreds of years, right? Why bother? And that's why I feel like those attempts that we used to look at and go, oh, why was this organization making a list of demands? Why were these people getting involved in a council and trying to take over a council? And this kind of very arrogant way of looking at them when I was young, instead of, in those days thinking, why didn't you try and become MPs and things like this? We have to go back and think, why did they do that? Because actually those are some of the, if they didn't get real success, they at least had some kind of integrity in terms of how they were talking to the system, right? So that's one. I think we have to go back and look. If we're going to, educate ourselves, that's the first place to look. The second thing is with regard to the youth, and I don't think we can blame either the Muslim youth or the community around them, because the entirety of this generation, and probably one before as well, there's been such a massive dumbing down of the education system in the United Kingdom, and political education was the first casualty, right? That nobody's really kind of got those skills. It's only kind of because people are in activist groups or activist communities or whatever they have some access to this. As a generality, there isn't that much political education. Why is it that those people who are campaigning now for Labour are not really targeting youth? They're targeting people, 40 plus, maybe 45 plus, etc. It's not just about old people vote for Conservatives. Yes, that's true, but they're never going to shift to Labour. They're trying to just talk to the people who've got some kind of capacity to have this conversation. So maybe the job is for us in the community to start trying to kind of give a political education and educate ourselves as well as to what's happened, because this is also part of a kind of neo-colonial rolling out of how to control society, how to manufacture consent, how to keep, the parameters of political discussions narrow. It's, we've had crisis after crisis, and actually we've been here before with Palestine, actually, in 2008-9, where we had a huge uprising against the state. I mean, it was massive. And we had a massive crackdown by the government, particularly on young people and particularly on young Muslims. So many went to prison just for sort of doing nonsense things. Like, I know somebody got about 2 or 3 years in prison for throwing an empty plastic water bottle at the gates of the Israeli embassy, right? This type of kind of sentencing, I mean, that alongside the anti-terrorism laws completely silenced the kind of political activism and dissent there was. We're talking about 15, 16, 17 years ago now, right? So we have to have a bit of guts, people our age, right, Mohsen, and kind of go, all right, we shouldn't have shut up then, and we should have supported the young people. I'm holding my hand up as well. They're okay. Me and a couple of people who wrote a report, people use that in the court cases, and the people who used the report didn't go to prison, right? But so what? What did we do after that? We have to think, okay, how do we continue this? How do we keep ensuring that there is political traction and political kind of mobilization across communities? It's not just about the Muslim community. Why is the far right rising? I mean, it's rising on the kind of, I've been watching the news. I've not do for a long time, but it's election time. Why is it the kind of, liberal, rightish leaning establishment is laughing at Nigel Farage and reform? I mean, it's a huge mistake because they're very popular. Why are they popular? Yes, their ideas are idiotic and basic and they don't make sense, but it's because we have such a dumbed down political culture in the country that they actually sound very, very appealing. And we have to be, finding what's our role in that, of a kind of not just exposing those kind of quote unquote extremes, but also the extremes of what is supposed to be the center and their kind of, hidden nastiness, which is basically the political system we are still living off our grandparents, but just in a different part of the world, which is a highly colonial, highly controlling, authoritarian state and center, right? So I've gone on a bit too long, I think, sister. But that's my view. I think we have to, and I don't know there's too many technical ways we can do this, and there's many more ways we've got to try to do it. We don't have time to talk about it, but it's something that we have
Thank
to
you,
do. We have to.
sister. I just have left with like 3.5 minutes for Mohsin bhai. If you can keeping the time in view and conclude the whole discussion, how would you conclude it? Because many people think that if we are talking about Palestine, it's not going to do anything decent. They feel more tired than the people of Palestine who are suffering with everything. When they are talking about Palestine and the situation going on there, they don't understand dream is one thing and reaching that goal or dream or objective is another thing, and it takes lots of patience, effort, and it is built up like brick by brick, but they don't understand it. They feel tired and they feel helpless and they feel useless or whatever. So what is your message in conclusion?
Well, I think, first of all, the key word is sacrifice. Those who are going to get involved in this kind of struggle, they've sacrificed most of their lives towards this. So seeing out the last 20 years is not a big deal. We might as well go all the way. And so what will that entail? It'll entail putting ourselves on the front line, being prepared to go to prison, as far as I'm concerned, being prepared to be censored, being prepared to speak out and really stand as the front line. Because the youngsters may be scared because of jobs and because of the reasons that Arzu's pointed out, which I totally agree with. There are many, many reasons why youngsters worry. But I think that those of us who are at the front line, our responsibility is definitely to take the hits on the front line if necessary. It's going to be to also organize our experiences and our thoughts in a way that we can communicate them far better. We're using social media and all the techniques. We have to improve our methods of reaching these audiences. It's also to really get those people within the community who privately can give finance to dedicate towards a socio-political thinking, think tanks or actual projects for enlivening the community. They are there. I mean, we had about £7,000 or £8,000 donated towards just our campaign within the space of 2 weeks by probably not that many benefactors, but they were politically aware enough to sort of back us. So it can be done. And of course, you've got capable people like Khalid who understands the system. He's being a voice, so you can put people who've got the right personas and personality. And around him, there are people like myself and others, and we've got probably a core of 50 to 60 activists already, and that's within the space of 2 weeks. So if we carried on and persevered, in Watford alone, we could end up with something like 200 to 300 people working actively, and then 300 people have to motivate the other 3,000 around them, and those 3,000 have to motivate beyond. The hope is this, that if you do this individually in each one of the towns, the 100 or so constituencies that Muslims might have awake and justice-orientated non-Muslims, the hope is this, that you could end up in say 15, 20 years, and this is what you've got to do, is you've got to play a 15-year game and not look short-term. 20 years down the line, your population here right now probably about 6 million Muslims, maybe 7, I'm not sure exactly, but it's roughly there or thereabouts. Going back 15 years ago, we were about 1 or 2 million, 15, 20. So say that we project in the same way, that our numbers grow, and we have, say, 15 million Muslims in Britain out of a population of 60 or 65, whatever. That's substantial. if you could educate that community with the virtue ethics and the morality and the political morality that we're talking about, and if we could fight that fight within our communities to say we must have our own spiritually, morally sound political narratives and identities and agendas and whatever, then and then we could also train a generation into believing those, then I think there's a chance. And I have to take inspiration from Imam Khomeini here, because they under a far worse, openly, killer institution of the Shah of Iran and what surrounded him with Savak and whatever. People like Ayatollah Beheshti, Ayatollah Khomeini, Ayatollah Mutahiri, and even Dr. Ali Shariati. There were so many of them who sacrificed themselves, many who've died, who I probably don't even know the names of, who were martyred as a result of the struggle. They went through a struggle and ultimately they overturned that system. And because of that, today, people like myself and those who are awakened, we have hope. The resistance axis is a direct result of the struggle from the tobacco revolutions in the early 20th century, led by the ulama, through to Ayatollah Khomeini and his struggles in the revolution in Iran in 1979. We have to look at that. You have to look at Musa Sadr, Imam Musa Sadr in Lebanon, sadly disappeared by those forces. But look what he's left behind. Look, today, Hezbollah is the one which is causing an absolute chaos for the system. So it can be done. Look at the Houthis. Look at the people in Syria, how they're doing. Look at the people in Iraq, the Hashd there. So they have done it. People have done it. Look at Sheikh Zakzaki. We, amongst our circles, have huge giants that can inspire us. That's what inspires me. And at the end of the day, while I moan and groan, it's only because, I'm tired probably from the last 2 weeks of campaigning. But actually, I've really enjoyed it. And I know that people out there, if I keep at them, I nag them, they will come. And that, I think, ultimately is what the frustration is. Because you're at the age of 60, you're being asked to go out and bring these people together. You've done it 3 or 4 times before. So you'll excuse me if I feel a little bit, like, okay, I should really be in retirement. Okay, this gives me a...
Yeah, we do. So, we do learn from Karbala. So there were people who were even unable to look, and they were old, and they were sick, and they were children, and they were young, and they were old. So we do have all the examples in front of us. It's just that we need to recognize our role. Thank you so much, Muslim. I'm really honored to have you all on the show, Sister Arzu, Sister Batul. I'm really grateful for your time and effort. And to the viewers, I would just say, all the Palestinian people are sacrificing themselves, sacrificing their Ismail of their home, loved ones, even the sleep and the food and everything they have. So what we are sacrificing for the humanity, for the dignity of humanity and dignity of Islam and Muslims. So think about it and look after yourself, and Allah Hafiz.